I now welcome by video conference Mr. Jeff Bongers from Gamma Energy Technology, and here with us in the room Mr. Robert Barr, I think Dr. Robert Barr, isn't it, from Electric Power Consultants. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, will you please state your full names and the capacity in which you appear today?
Okay. My name's Dr. Robert Barr, and I'm here in my capacity as director of my own company, Electric Power Consulting.
Thank you.
And Dr. Jeff Bongers, representing Gamma Energy Technology as a director of my own company.
Thank you very kindly. Do either of you have a short statement?
Over to you, Jeff.
I do. First of all, thanks for the opportunity to have input into the important investigations into energy planning and regulation in Australia. It's been a passion of mine for quite some time. Of particular interest to me is the modelling work that's conducted by AEMO and CSIRO in this area. For some time, I've really been advocating an alternative approach to looking at what decarbonising the grid should really look like and what the future should look like. And while AEMO briefly talk about system costs in a prior ISP, they really have continued on a pathway, in my opinion at least, of limited technology scenarios without an adequate focus on minimising the total system cost with all technologies available. If Australia is to remain competitive in terms of its domestic energy position, which is really important, in my opinion, it really must adopt an approach that seeks to optimise the lowest total system cost at the level of decarbonisation we seek to achieve when we want to achieve that. The continued debate over the use of levelised cost does my head in and really does highlight a poor understanding of how the electricity system actually works and how it can be better optimised. I didn't actually put a submission into the inquiry because I wasn't aware of the inquiry at the time, but most of the work that we have done with my colleague from Red Vector in the UK is in peer-reviewed journals or open source on our websites. So happy for your time and happy to help with your investigation as a committee.
Thank you. And just checking with the Secretariat, will we still take submissions?
It's a matter for the committee.
I can indicate my general support to take late submissions, but it's ultimately a question before the committee we'd have to resolve, Chair.
I don't have any inherent problem with it, but it's simply whether the Secretariat's going to be able to have enough time to do the work that it needs to do.
If you're still wishing to put in a submission, we'll take one, if possible, by the end of this week or early next week, if that's works for you, Mr. Bongers.
Okay.
That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, well, a little bit of my background. I'm a consulting engineer, and my working life goes back to working with what's now known as Endeavour Energy. And then I've moved on to starting my own consulting business and providing consulting services all around Australia to distribution companies, to high-voltage customers, to governments, and working overseas as well. And my goal in life is to provide, and it's been my goal my whole career, to provide low-cost, reliable electricity to customers. And at the moment, I'm pretty shattered because we are not achieving this. And my view is that electricity prices in the Australian market are probably about 30% higher than they should be. If we perform better, our customers would be a lot better off, the economy would be better off, Australia would be better off. Unfortunately, that's not the case. We go back in time. I go back to my university days in the 1970s where we had blackouts. I'm probably one of the few people in this room that have experienced large-scale blackouts in Sydney, and they were rolling blackouts, and they were ultimately the trigger for Neville Wran, the then Premier of New South Wales, to build the big power stations that have been very successful for the last decades, Eraring, Vales Point, Liddell, Wallerawang. They've been very successful. Then things have moved on. In the 1990s, we had the split between generation, network and retail, and the use of the pool and the market, as others have commented, I think, very, very successful in the early days. The very early introduction of the pool provided operational efficiencies that flowed straight through. I could see it in the bills of my high voltage customers, my high voltage clients, and that was very successful. But it began to unravel in 2007, which you may remember with the air conditioning crisis. We started having the first of major problems, and they resulted in uncontrolled, what I would call uncontrolled capital expenditure in networks, particularly in Brisbane and in New South Wales, and I think in other places as well. In the 10s, things start to unravel a little bit more, and in today, in the 2020s, we're unravelling at a faster rate. This committee's got a big job to do to work to get this system back on track, and it needs putting back on track. The biggest problems are subsidies and what I'd call ad hoc government interventions. They're not helping the system, and I don't believe that with the split up of the system, with generation, transmission, retail all broken up, there's no part of the industry that's fully engaging with customers. The pricing mechanisms that we're using in the east, the national market and the pool, is not giving a proper value to dispatchable capacity. To Senator Gosh, in WA, they do have a capacity market, and I think will have some benefits from that. But I think in Western Australia they have other problems. But here on the east, part of the issue is that the value of dispatchable generation is not properly valued. With network pricing, we've got the Australian Energy Regulator setting pricing. We've got the regulated asset base, where it's where network owners are incentivised to increase their regulated asset base to grow their businesses, which is a pretty unhealthy situation, but one that has to be managed and managed carefully. And I think we've got to do a lot better. And retailers, I don't think retailers are adding a whole lot of value to the system. Then I'll move on to my second point, and that is planning. Effective generation, transmission, distribution, retail planning is essential for having an efficient industry, and it's breaking down. Each part of the industry plans its own path, independent of the other parts, and we lack the overall connectivity that we used to have earlier in my career when we had organisations like the SECV and the Electricity Commission of New South Wales that used to bring all that together to make sensible planning decisions. And then I move on to AEMO and the Integrated System Plan. The Integrated System Plan, I've done a lot of plans in my day, and the Integrated System Plan rates very, very poorly in my view. It's a generation and transmission plan with no real consideration given to distribution costs, to behind-the-meter solar, behind-the-meter batteries, and it claims to be a low-cost system, but how can they say it's a low-cost system when they don't look at total system costs? Now, like Dr Bongers, I have my own models, and I run my models on the integrated system plan, on the step change scenario, the progressive change, all the different options that they put forward, and I can't get them to work. I cannot, with the resources, the generation resources, the transmission resources, the storage resources, I cannot supply the loads that are in the integrated system plan, and technically it just, to me, doesn't add up. And that, what really is worrying is that the integrated system plan is then used as an input to a lot of other players who then make decisions on this plan, which I think is not up to standard. That would be
just for the purposes of time, because we don't have a lot. I'm sure senators will want to get to. But again, the invitation, if you want to put all this into a submission to the committee, we will accept that.
Okay. So
apologies, I don't mean to be rude. If you have to finish off another minute
I'll finish off quickly if I could.
Yes, please.
Okay. So my third point was driving electricity costs down. I think everyone in this room is interested in how to drive electricity costs down. The first thing to do is to revisit the integrated system plan. There's no need for AEMO to do a new ISP. They've got the one they've just finished. All they've got to do is finish the work off. and add in the distribution costs. They've got to add in the behind-the-meter solar, behind-the-meter batteries, and tell us what the delivered costs will be. There's no need for AEMO to redo it, and it's poor timing for them to start off a new one. We need generators to compete better in the market with all the characteristics. And to get that, we need to lift the ban on nuclear energy. We need to have nuclear energy available in that mix to drive costs down. We also got to drive out subsidies, and we've got to work out ways of reducing the rate of growth of the regulated asset base in the distribution networks. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Barr. Senator Canavan.
Thank you, Chair. I might just start with Dr. Barr. Both of you have made excellent contributions. Thank you very much. I suppose one thing I probably haven't asked enough about today is the costs potentially to upgrade the distribution network based on the current plan. We heard last week from the AER, I believe, that there's a wall of CapEx on its way. Have you looked at this? I mean, on the current ISP, what sort of costs are we looking at in regards to distribution? And Dr. Bongas,
maybe Dr. Bongas go first.
Either of you can answer that.
Thanks for the question, Senator. I haven't looked at the specifics in terms of the model. Our model that we run is very similar to AEMO in terms of the things that it includes in costs. So we don't include the distribution network upgrades. We do include the costs of behind-the-meter solar and behind-the-meter storage. But one thing that we have seen is that for the amount of rooftop solar and residential storage or community energy resources that the ISP step change scenario is looking to have by 2050, the distribution system is going to be massively upgraded to get anywhere close to being able to deliver that system. And the distribution system is the most expensive part to upgrade. If you think of the NBN, when the NBN was first rolled out, Telstra said the last 20 metres is the most expensive. The distribution system is exactly the same. It's every driveway, every road, every court, every suburb is going to need solar on every other house. And the system is just not set up for that. And I know that Dr. Barr has done some work in that space, so I'll hand over to him in terms of how that works. But certainly the distribution system must be costed in. I do have an opinion that I just don't think we'll have that level of solar penetration, because I don't think we'll be able to upgrade the distribution network in the timeframes that AEMO was saying.
Yes. Senator Canavan, my modelling picks up the distribution costs and pushes it through because I'm working on a total delivered cost basis. Yeah. And as Dr. Bongas said, the distribution costs are much larger than the transmission costs. So basically AEMO are focusing on a narrow part, whereas they need to consider not just the narrow part but the total distribution costs. And when you look at their integrated system plan, they've pushed so much cost down into the customer rooftop solar systems. Typical sizes these days are like 3 kilowatts or 5 kilowatts. If you look at their integrated system plan, they're putting an average of 12 kilowatts on people's roofs, something that's just totally unrealistic. And
is it unrealistic from a area point of view? Or is there enough area in someone's house to do this? I'm not sure.
There's two major problems. Firstly, there aren't enough roofs. Okay, and with the roofs that are there, the north-facing square metres are insufficient.
Right.
Okay, but that's the easy part. The really hard part is getting the power out of those solar systems into the low voltage network, and then up into the medium voltage and into the transmission system. So, for example, in the low voltage system, I've been designing them for all my career, and you would typically design 3 to 5 kVA input into a house. Okay, now if you're going to take 12 kilowatts and push it out, that's double at least, and then you've got to add it on because it's in the opposite direction. The voltage drop and the voltage rise, you get these massive voltage changes. The end of the day, what it means is that it's not possible to run these systems with the existing network that we have. Augmenting the network is incredibly difficult. to get this level of penetration, you effectively have to rebuild the distribution network.
Jeez.
To get
When you
these
say
levels
rebuild,
in the
you
system
mean
has to be rebuilt.
You've got to relay cables.
You've got to relay cables, more substations, more works, and it's a very, very expensive exercise. It'll make all the other things in the AEMO plan pale into insignificance.
Is there some kind of value on how much that would cost, or is there a value of the current network?
Well,
what's its replacement cost in regulatory asset?
You've got to look at the
bases?
cents
Do we
per
know that?
kilowatt hour.
Right.
The distribution costs are like 12 or 13 cents, depending on what part of the country you're in. And if you went for a plan like this, my view is that you could expect that to double.
Wow. Right. Okay.
It's that large.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Right. And so why aren't people... Well, maybe I won't ask why. Are people looking at this at all? You mentioned the ISP sort of seems to ignore this, but is there anybody that government has tasked to look at this question of total system cost?
All the distribution companies will be dealing with this in a small way. Like this doesn't happen overnight. This is happening slowly. It just builds up and builds up. And I would expect that there's a lot of expenditure going in, a lot of capex going into low voltage networks spread right across the network to get the capacity up as more and more solar systems go in. But we're nowhere near 12 at the moment. But and the penetration rates might be like 30% or 40%. But if they go to 50, 60, 70% and the sizes increase, the systems will just become unworkable. And what will happen is it just won't happen.
Right.
Those systems won't get built because it'll become too expensive and too difficult.
And Dr. Bongas?
I think part of the question you asked, Senator, was has anyone been tasked with this, this part of the problem? The shorter answer is no, because there isn't one person or one organisation that's responsible for everything. So in the ISP plan, AEMO quite clearly delineates everything at the distribution and residential. They don't count the cost for, and they don't account for how difficult it may or may not be. So AEMO aren't responsible for that. The work that CSIRO does on its gen cost work and its capital work, they do a good job at capital forecasting for the future, but they don't look at a total system cost approach. So there isn't anyone who's accountable for the entire system. No one controller that sits as an organisation to say, generators, you need to make sure you're talking to transmission. Transmission, you need to make sure you're talking to distribution. Distribution, you need to make sure you're talking to your customers about how many batteries and how many vehicles they're going to have that are electric. There isn't anyone in that space at the moment.
Just going to some of the work I've seen you do, Dr. Bongas, I believe you've mentioned you've done some modelling on this in one of your reports. I think this is from 2021. You explicitly say you haven't included Snowy 2.0, the battery of the nation, into the forecast future for the total system cost. Why haven't you included those? Do you think they're unwise investments or they won't happen?
It depends on the scenarios that we've been looking at. So some of our earlier modelling, we looked at what happens if you don't do Snowy 2.0 and Battery of the Nation. That was before work had started on Snowy 2.0 essentially, to try and understand the value. The short answer is Snowy 2 has value as a storage system. It is large, it is seasonal, it is relatively expensive, but delivers a really good value proposition because it allows for seasonal storage. It's really the only technology available to us that can store potential energy for a long period of time. So our later work, our latest pieces of work all include Snowy 2.
Right.
And we look at sensitivities about whether Battery of the Nation makes a difference. And the short answer is that long-term storage helps lower total system cost. It's not remarkable in terms of how much it lowers it, but it certainly does make a difference.
Okay, thanks. Just back to you, Dr. Barr, and this is another one Dr. Bongas might want to respond to. You were quite critical, I think, in your opening remarks of the ISP. Is there any type of consultation done on the modelling? Does AEMO reach out to people like yourself or Dr. Bongas and seek some challenge, have a round table about their assumptions and techniques?
Publicly, they go out for consultations, and I provided consultations for the 2024 and gave them a very detailed report, that report there,
Right.
of which I have got absolutely zero response, nothing.
Can I just stop you? What I'm particularly asking, because I've had some experience with economic modelling, when that has been done, or that I've been involved with government agencies, we'll often have a roundtable with modellers, like just with experts,
Yep.
like yourselves, don't want to call you nerds, but, you know, they just love numbers, love models, love programming, and they'll tear it apart,
Yeah.
what the model does. So it's one thing to go and ask the general public for submissions, but is there anything like that where there's a good to and fro between very smart people about the underlying code and assumptions in these models?
Yeah, well, I've tried to have that consultation, and
Right.
I've tried to contact them and to organise meetings which have been totally unsuccessful. I got so frustrated at some point that I made direct submissions to the chairman of the board of AEMO and all the board members. I got some response, but fundamentally I've been totally unsuccessful in the consultation process, not for want of trying.
Dr. Bongers, do you have any relevant experience?
I haven't had the pleasure of sending off emails and letters to the board, but I am engaged with AEMO in terms of assumptions and other bits and pieces, but they are very closed shop in terms of how their model works and other bits and pieces, which is one of the reasons that the brains for the modelling work that we do, we have in a peer-reviewed paper for that very reason, so it is at least transparent. We have had discussions with CSIRO in the past about a possibility of a roundtable, and not a model-off where we have a bunch of modellers, but certainly to give input and understanding, but I've seen no action in that space.
Can I just ask one follow-up? Actually, just from Dr. Barr, I think you explicitly mentioned that you can't make the ISP kind of model work. I mean, is there enough information out there publicly that you can kind of replicate or run the ISP, or are you having to make some assumptions about what they're doing?
It's impossible to get the model exactly as AEMO have it, okay?
Right.
Because, you know, I've got one set of conditions here and they've got their own, and I'd bring them together as best I can.
Yep.
But I look at the amount of energy they're going to supply to customers. I look at the number of generators, the megawatts of generators. I give the system, I give the renewables every chance to try and supply the load. And I don't just miss out by a little bit, I miss out by a lot. And I think a lot of it goes back to being able to ride through wind droughts and times of very difficult... power systems don't just work on good days, they have to work on the worst day. And it's the worst day scenario that brings them undone.
I mean, is there any technical reason why AEMO couldn't publish their entire model? I don't know what
already
software
publish a lot.
you or they use, but would they be able to just publish it all? You could go and get the code and interrogate it. They presumably don't do that. What you're saying, is there any reason why they can't?
Well, they do publish a lot.
Okay.
And, you know, I interpret it as best I can. What's lacking is communication across the table of actually how they're doing things. And that's what I would really welcome with AEMO. If they could spend the time, I think it would be beneficial for both of us.
Dr. Bongers, did you want to add to that?
Well, absolutely agree. In our latest piece of work, which is not currently public because we haven't finished it all, that we have managed to get the ISP to work. Similar to Dr. Barr, in previous iterations of our model, we haven't been able to keep the lights on with the ISP, neither this ISP or previous. But what it seems the ISP have done in this particular iteration is that they have something called price-sensitive demand, and hydrogen fulfills that role. So if you can run hydrogen electrolyzers for only following the sun, so for 20% of the time, you can get very close to the ISP. It's not exact. They have more data than we do. They model to a higher resolution than we do, which you'd expect the market operator to be able to do, to be fair. So we've been able to get much closer to the ISP, but the assumptions in which we think they've got there, we don't think will ever come to pass. A hydrogen industry that runs electrolyzers at a 20% load factor, it's just not going to happen.
One thing I didn't get a chance to ask them last week is my interpretation of the ISP is there seems to be almost an assumption of perfect information about future weather events. I mean, sometimes in the model just before a La Nina or something, suddenly peaking gas comes online and saves the day in that year. Is that what they're assuming? I didn't get a chance to interrogate them. Is there sort of perfect forecastability of what the weather will be in the next few years?
I'm not sure about that. I have my suspicions that they might have much better foresight than we model with.
Or that anyone has, or that weathermen do.
Yeah, that's my suspicion.
Okay, that's interesting.
I just don't know.
You don't know. All right, well, hopefully we might get them back at some point. Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the extra time.
No problem. Dr Barr, I've just got one quick one, then I'll throw to Senator Gosh. You said you've corresponded, and I've seen your report or your submission to the draft ISP,
yes.
Draft ISP. You got no response back.
No response at all.
And there was nothing in their consultation report about the points you made?
No, and it follows a similar, more detailed submission in 2022. So it's not the first time this has gone through. And I think they're missing an opportunity to get some really serious feedback.
You're not the only person who the committee has spoken to or I've spoken to that has made that point. So I think the points around transparency may be one thing, accountability seems to be another. Senator Gosh.
Dr Barr, you noted that as far as planning goes currently, there isn't an inclusion of behind-the-meter solar and battery capacity.
Cost.
Okay.
The megawatts and megawatt hours are there, but not the dollars.
How would you go about doing that assessment? Is that a feasible thing to do that's not...
For a consulting fee, I'd be very happy to do it for you. And, you've got to look at how the Australian Energy Regulator set network tariffs, and they look at the regulated asset base, and they look at efficient operating costs, and they look at depreciation and all these things. So what you need to do is, if you want to work out what those costs are going to be as they transfer, you need to reverse engineer that for the systems that AEMO are planning in their integrated system plan. It's more than doable, and with good engineering effort, you can make estimates of what low voltage capacity additions are required to meet the requirements of the rooftop solar and the like, and it's something that I've done in my modelling, and I'd be happy to consult with AEMO if they needed assistance in that space.
Does that substantively rely on using past data to predict what the future looks like?
It's a technique. It's a strategy. It's a way of doing things. Not necessarily. There's plenty of data out there, but what AEMO are lacking, they don't seem to have any vision inside distribution networks, or particularly down in the low voltage network. People think that the low voltage network is the least important part of the system. You know, the bit that's in front of your house. It's actually the most important. It's where the real dollars in the system are, and it's one of the biggest contributors to your electricity bill. So they really need to make the effort to focus on the total delivered cost all the way down, not just to the electricity meter, because the electricity meter doesn't include the rooftop solar and the batteries. It's got to go all the way down to the power point. And if they did that, they would be doing the country a great service. We'd get some visibility of what the real cost of their system is going to be.
Thank you. And Dr Bonges, you said earlier that the batteries have the capacity to lower the overall system cost as they're currently deployed. If batteries become more affordable and more efficient, does that then further lower the overall system cost?
There's a bit of a caveat, I guess, to the role of storage. Batteries are particularly useful for really short-term problems. So if you've got excess solar or wind today and you want to store it for tomorrow or maybe the day after, batteries are a really good technology for that. Batteries are a terrible technology to store excess solar from January and move to June. So as the battery prices are forecast to come down, and that's part of the work that CSIRO do as part of their gen cost. So we do have visibility on what CSIRO thinks, at least, of what rooftop solar and what behind-the-meter storage costs will be, or at least their forecasts. But the role of batteries is really short-term storage. It's not long-term storage. The analogy I would use is that if you've got a 1,000-litre tank, so like a pallet-sized water tank, you can store water from today in that, but you probably use that and finish that in about 3 days. You need a reservoir to keep all of Brisbane or Canberra fed with water. So you can store water in a 1,000-litre container, but it has a different role to a reservoir that stores enough water to run a city for 3 or 4 years. So that's where I said earlier on that Battery of the Nation and Snowy 2 are much more important storage devices because they can store water and potential energy, therefore, for a season or for a year or two. So you could put Snowy 2 water back into the reservoir and not draw that down for a year or maybe 2 years because you know you've had some really wet years. The Bureau of Meteorology is looking to say, look, it's going to be drier in a couple of years. You could use Snowy to do that. You can't use batteries to do that.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Did you have a couple?
Just this software. I've had a look. So the software that is used for the ISP, is that Plexos?
I understand it is. Yes.
Yeah, right. Plexos was just recently bought by Blackstone and Vista Equity. Are you aware of that?
No.
Right. Blackstone are themselves massive investors in renewable energy. So we now have a situation where the modelling done for the energy transition is owned by a company that has got a massive commercial interest in the rollout of renewable energy. You're not aware of that, though. I wouldn't expect you to be.
Yeah.
And you're not allowed to get access to what?
Yeah.
Can you get access to it? I mean, can you pay for it? Or?
Maybe Dr. Bongs can answer that one better.
In terms of Plexos is a commercial product. Right. So if you have a lot, and the subscription is a lot, but it's not the tool that's as important to the assumptions and how they use that tool. Yeah. So, for example, in the current ISP, they've got the step change scenario as one of the scenarios, but they present three scenarios, the hydrogen superpower, but then they've got another scenario where renewables aren't deployed as much. So there are ways to use Plexos to model different scenarios. I guess my issue with the ISP is the question they've asked in the first place, they've chosen to model. So why have they restricted the technologies to wind, solar, batteries and gas backup? So what about carbon capture and storage? What about even though nuclear is illegal currently, they could still do it as a scenario. Dr. Barr and I have both looked at nuclear, both looked at CCS in terms of what it could bring to the table in terms of value. So the modelling platform, if it's owned by somebody, that's not that relevant. It's more about how they construct the questions and how they look at risk, how they look at weather, what technologies they choose to include, by when, are much more important questions to ask.
Wish I had your lack of cynicism, Dr. Bongs. They bought this company for $1.6 billion. Well, I wonder why it was so invaluable to them. I should, just for the record, I might have missed a step there. Plexos is a software produced by a company called Energy Exemplar, and Energy Exemplar was bought by a consortium of Blackstone and Vista Equity for $1.6 billion just last year. All right. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. If you were asked to take questions on notice, the date to have them come back to the committee is 12 November, and you may still get some further questions on notice in writing. And as I mentioned, if you do wish to put in a submission, if you could have it in by early next week, that would be terrific.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Right. Now I would like to welcome the Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. The Senate has resolved that an officer of a department of the Commonwealth or of a state shall not be asked to give opinions on matters of policy and shall be given reasonable opportunity to refer questions asked of the officer to superior officers or to a minister. This resolution does not preclude questions asking for explanations of policies or factual questions about when and how policies were adopted. For the Hansard record, if I'm not rushing you all, will you please state your full names and the capacity in which you appear? When you're ready, don't rush.
Thank you, Chair. Simon Duggan, Deputy Secretary Energy, Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water.
Kirsty Gowans, Head of Division for Electricity in the Department of Climate Change.
Lisa Beckman, Acting Principal Advisor in Rewiring the Nation Office.
Matthew Minchin, Acting Head of Division, National Energy Transformation.
Adam McKissick, Chief Energy Economist, Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water.
Melissa Pang, Branch Head of Electricity Markets.
Thank you very much. And for those at home, this is what accountability looks like. I get to see these fine people before us in Senate estimates. In fact, I think next Monday we'll be back together again for estimates. Do you have an opening statement?
Chair, we made a written submission. We've got nothing to add at this stage to that written submission by way of opening statement. We'll look forward to the committee's questions.
Great. Senator Kenneback.
Thanks, Chair. I might just start with this modelling. I'm just interested in this. So, can you explain to me how EMO does this? Is it this Energy Exemplar Plexos software? Is this how the modelling is done for the ISP?
So, I understand, Senator, you had AEMO here with you last week. I watched their reports.
Not here now, though, that's all. But
I know that they
sure
took you through.
I hope you know what they do.
Well, certainly do know what they do.
So do they use Plexos?
So, in terms of the specifics of the software and the modelling, etc., that they use, my understanding is yes, they use Plexos. Right. It's a pretty standard electricity market modelling tool. But it's owned by an investment fund that has millions, if not billions, of dollars invested in renewable energy. Are you aware of that? So I became aware of that, Senator, when you made that comment to the to the previous witness, and also heard their response, which is to say that that the tool is important, but what's more important is how you use the tool and the assumptions that you utilise, etc.
But we're using this model to make decisions that impact on the commercial returns of renewable energy investments, are we not?
So the model informs AEMO's modelling of different potential pathways for the electricity system under a range of assumptions and consistent with government policy. So yes, that informs decision-making.
Wow, I don't know how we've allowed a situation where that is owned by a company themselves is invested in the very outputs of this modelling. Are you aware of any arrangements in place to ensure these obvious conflicts of interest do not generate inferior outcomes for Australian people? You weren't even aware of the ownership, so...
I'm not aware of the, as I said, the ownership structure. I'm taking on good faith that you've represented that accurately. It's the first I was aware of it. I'm not aware of any...
Financial Review and many other publications as closed November last year, apparently, the deal. It's a safe at $1.6 billion. Are you aware, how can people access that? We just heard it's a significant cost to access this software. What is that cost, and are you aware of how people can access it and ground truth the modelling done?
I asked one of my colleagues who utilises similar sort of modelling software if they can provide any answers to that.
Right.
Sure. I mean, the Plexos software that is used to run these models is publicly available. You can purchase a licence. I don't know what the cost of that licence is. We could check that one and take it on notice, but it's publicly available software. It
doesn't sound like it's affordable for some of the academics and the like. You might have taken on notice, but even if you did have a licence, could you replicate the work of AEMO, or is their work not? Is the way they use the model not published enough for people to replicate it?
Well, AEMO does publish quite a lot of information about the assumptions they use. It's quite an open process they use to run the ISP. So I think a lot of their assumptions are available. There are a lot of technical documents they release on their website to support the ISP. So I think we saw in Dr. Bonga's testimony before us, I think he does run similar processes according to his testimony. So I think
Could you just take the question on notice I asked, if that's all right?
Sure.
Yeah, thanks. What's the shadow price of carbon that our EMO use in the ISP?
So our EMO utilise effectively a carbon budget methodology. And so that carbon budget methodology effectively assigns, consistent again with government policy around emissions reduction, a certain level of carbon that is attributable to the electricity sector. And so in that context, it's a model-driven output. It's not an input assumption in terms of then what's derived in terms of a shadow carbon price. So one of my colleagues may be able to correct me on this, but I don't think that that's something that AEMO publish from...
No, we've asked for it before and they refused to give it to us. They say they're not at liberty to share this information. I don't know who's restricting their liberty, but do you know what the shadow carbon price is in the ISP, the last version of the ISP?
No. Senator, I mean, we can, again, I think AEMO has given you the answer, which is, again, it's not published as part of their very extensive suite of information they publish, but we can take it on notice.
Could you take that on notice? Because I can't quite understand why that would be a particular issue. Last week I asked the head of AEMO, Daniel Westerman, if he could guarantee prices would fall. He said no, he couldn't. Are prices going to fall for Australian consumers? Electricity prices going to fall?
Yeah, so I think, Senator, I did watch Mr Westerman's appearance, and I think Ms York went on later in the appearance to make the point that what you can be sure of...
Who?
Ms York, Marion York,
Yep.
made the point that faced with different technology choices for meeting Australia's future electricity demand needs, that the lowest cost technology choice will lead to lower price outcomes than the alternative. I think that was the evidence, and
but the problem, the way this particular exercise came out, the way the conclusion came out was that AEMO doesn't model that. They model the least cost pathway to get to government policy objectives, one of which, of course, is 82% renewables by 2030. So it does, of course, massively restrict options that you look at or that AEMO looks at. I mean, have you got, I mean, has the department or anyone done an analysis of the total system cost? We're hearing this morning from lots of experts in this area. They're very critical of the work being done to plan our energy, I hate the word transition, but energy transition. That people, the experts are very critical of the fact that no one seems to be looking at the total system cost of this and trying to minimise that. Is there any work that the government or yourselves are doing to estimate that?
So AEMO does put out the cost of the various different scenarios that they run out to 2050 in terms of the capital cost of the new build, consistent with the different technology choices. And so they are quite transparent about those elements of the costs. And that is, to our mind, I mean, that is the most informed, evidence-based and contested publicly.
I'm just coming back to my question. They admitted themselves that that's not looking at the least cost pathway. It's looking at the least cost pathway to get to the government policy objectives. What I'm asking for is there anybody looking at what's the least cost pathway without those constraints, like forming a baseline or trying to minimise total system cost for everybody? Has anyone done that work?
So they do, in their what they call the counterfactual scenario, they do look at a scenario where they don't have any transmission build, and effectively that the system service that would otherwise be provided by the ISP transmission build is provided.
But that scenario still has carbon budgets?
Yes, so it's effectively delivering the same outcome.
So isn't the answer to my question no? No one's doing that work unless you can...
Well, Senator, you kind of need to be clear on what your objective is in order to be able to...
My objective, I don't know what the government's objective is. My objective is to get the lowest cost for Australian consumers. Is anyone doing a work at how can we produce electricity at the lowest cost?
Yeah. So
has anyone done that without any other constraints?
Yeah. So AEMO does that in the context of the government's emissions reduction targets. That is correct.
And just to be clear, I'm not asking just about AEMO. I'm not trying to blame them here. They're only doing what they're asked. But at a government level, at a whole of government level, is anybody looking at how to minimise cost for the Australian consumers, absence of any other objective?
So all the work that we do in this regard would be consistent with government policy. Right. So it would be consistent with the way AEMO models.
So because no one's doing that work, it's not possible to conclude that this particular plan, the government's current plan, is the cheapest way of delivering electricity for Australians.
So
no one's done that.
Yeah. So what I mean, the way to understand the ISP is that it models out the optimal development pathway. You're absolutely correct, Senator, consistent with government emissions reduction policies. It does so in a way that recognises that assets that are currently providing generation capacity into the system will reach the end of their productive life, and it looks at the least cost way of replacing those assets. And so the technology choices that come out of the different scenarios are the ones that, through the work of CSIRO and the GenCost publication with AEMO, are the lowest system cost way of delivering on those outcomes.
Okay. Just turning to the objective of 82% renewables by 2030, are we on track to hit that?
Yeah. So, Senator, we are becoming more and more encouraged by the pathway to 82%. So when it was announced by the government, I think at the time it was recognised that we needed to see a significant acceleration in renewable energy investment. That was part of the reason for putting out a target that was achievable, but that was going to require a fair bit of effort. And so since that time, we've observed that the pathway wouldn't be linear, that in a sense what we would see is investors responding to the investment signals as other sources of generation exited the market. That provides a signal for new sources of generation to enter. We've also got a range of government policies that are intended to support new generation capacity, like the Capacity Investment Scheme, supported by things like the Rewiring the Nation program to get the related transmission infrastructure in place. So what we're actually seeing over the past short period is a significant increase in what we're seeing in terms of projects reaching financial closure. So to date in 2024, we've had 9.1 gigawatts of large-scale renewable energy generation and storage projects reach financial closure, which is up from 8.3 gigawatts last year. And what we're expecting, basically of that 4.5 gigawatts are utility-scale solar and wind. Now, what we need to hit in terms of an average annual is about 6 gigawatts. So through to October, we're at 4.5. We think, on that basis, that we'll get close to achieving the 6.
So 4.5 being built this year?
Yeah, 4.5 gigawatts having reached financial closure.
No. Yeah, okay.
Yep.
All right, because they'll be built over many years, potentially. So you need 6 gigawatts a year. How much has been built over the last 12 months? Has actually been installed, come online?
Yeah, so over the last 12 months, it's in the order of about 3 to 4 gigawatts worth of new generation capacity.
So about 50, we're only going half.
But that's utility scale. On top of that, you've got about 3 gigawatts worth of household solar being added as well.
You could come back on notice, because you obviously don't have the exact figures. The Minister a couple of years ago said we need to build 22,000 solar panels every day, install 22,000 solar panels every day and 40 new turbines a month. Over the last 12 months, how many solar panels have we installed a day, and how many wind turbines on average each month have we installed?
I don't know if we've got that information at our fingertips. We might have to take that when I notice it.
Why aren't we tracking that? If that was, that was in a minute the Minister gave that speech. We're not tracking that at all?
We are tracking that, Senator.
Okay.
We will have that information ready for estimates, because we would be expecting that we might be asked that. Sorry, we are just a little bit behind schedule in the market.
We'll do that next week,
inquiry.
But if you could, maybe someone could ask while we're still here for an hour or so. Maybe if you got it for estimates, you'd have it. I'm sure someone back at the department would have it. So maybe I'll come back to it at the end of this hour, because it's a pretty simple question, and you've obviously done the work. I mean, it seems like there's a great risk that we won't meet this, though. We're obviously behind right now. You say that it doesn't have to be linear and we might catch up. Are you doing any work on a plan B in case we do not hit these targets and potentially have energy shortfalls?
So the work we're doing is ensuring that through the Capacity Investment Scheme, through the Renewable Energy Transformation Agreements, through the Rewiring the Nation Fund, through all of these tools, that we're putting the market in the best possible position to achieve 82%. So that's our singular focus.
So there's you haven't been asked to look at any alternative to the 82% by 2030?
No. So it's government policy, it's a government target. 82% absolutely critical to getting to 43% emissions reduction, which is in line with the government's Paris.
Does any other part of the world have, outside of those that use hydroelectricity for a lot of their renewables, or a lot of their energy. Does anywhere else in the world have 82% solar and wind with a little bit of hydro like we're planning to do?
So there are countries that do have levels of renewable penetration that are in excess of our own.
I know, but are they met those largely through hydroelectricity?
Through a variety of different generation technologies.
I'd love you to point to something that does. I mean, one other problem I've got here, or one other thing that most Australians shake their head at, is we seem to have now one of the highest power prices in the world, and we've got all these energy resources. Why is that? Why are our electricity prices 3 times that of the US now?
So, Senator, our energy prices sit broadly in the bottom third of the OECD. You would expect them to.
That's not true. What is? We don't seem, just on this one, I wanted to ask this. Yeah. We don't seem to have electricity prices published in the IEA Energy and Prices report anymore. So do you know the one I'm referring to, the publication I'm referring to? The last time, it was 2018 was the last time they published Australian electricity prices. Why is that?
Senator, there is
Thank you.
IEA data from 2023.
Right.
So that shows Australia at about $53 US a megawatt hour. Below Japan,
who's paying $53
France,
a megawatt hour in Australia?
Yeah, in US dollar terms, that's
but that's not the whole state. Even in US dollar terms, that's not
on
right.
average through 2023.
2023,
in US dollar terms.
What's the price? That's not right.
So below Japan, France, UK.
Okay, but you're talking wholesale. You're talking wholesale, obviously.
This is wholesale.
I don't even think those figures they seem very out of whack. I mean, the average price in most states has been over $100, hasn't it, a megawatt hour recently?
If we look at retail prices,
Australian dollars, admittedly, but Australian dollars not 50 cents.
So the most recent retail price comparison from the OECD, 2022, shows us below the OECD average, below France, Japan, UK, Germany.
What's the price?
So it's 17.6 cents per kilowatt hour.
Again, who's paying that? I mean, how do you compile these figures? Because I don't know anyone that would get 17 cents a kilowatt hour.
So this is average. So this is going back prior to 2022, prior to the energy crisis, associated with the war in Ukraine. But prices have sort of come back to those sort of levels since then.
Most people are paying 30, 40 cents a kilowatt hour. What are you paying on your bill? You're paying 17 cents a kilowatt hour?
Well, it varies. So, but these are average numbers, and
that doesn't seem right.
Average numbers over time that you can compare across countries. So, but
maybe I'll go and ask some of my colleagues behind there that might have more information. I'll come back, but I'll take the call. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I'll just move the call around. Senator